Chapter 76 of Phineas Redux by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Deon Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Madame Goesler's Legacy. One morning, very shortly after her return to Harrington, Lady Chiltern was told that Mr. Spooner of Spoon Hall had called and desired to see her. She suggested that the gentleman had probably asked for her husband, who at that moment was enjoying his recovered supremacy in the centre of Trumpton Wood. But she was assured that on this occasion Mr. Spooner's mission was to herself. She had no quarrel with Mr. Spooner, and she went to him at once. After the first greeting, he rushed into the subject of the great triumph. "So we've got rid of Mr. Fothergill, Lady Chiltern." "Yes, Mr. Fothergill will not, I believe, trouble us any more. He is an old man, it seems, and has retired from the Duke's service." "I can't tell you how glad I am, Lady Chiltern. We were afraid that Chiltern would have thrown it up, and then I don't know where we should have been. England would not have been England any longer, to my thinking, if we hadn't won the day. It'd have been just like a French Revolution. Nobody would have known what was coming or where he was going." That Mr. Spooner should be enthusiastic on any hunting question was a matter of course, but still it seemed to be odd that he should have driven himself over from Spoon Hall to pour his feelings into Lady Chiltern's ear. "We shall go on very nicely now, I don't doubt," said she, "and I'm sure that Lord Chiltern will be glad to find that you are pleased." "I am very much pleased, I can tell you." Then he paused, and the tone of his voice was changed altogether when he spoke again. "But I didn't come over only about that, Lady Chiltern. Miss Palliser has not come back with you, Lady Chiltern?" "We left Miss Palliser at Matching. You know she is the Duke's cousin." "I wish she wasn't, with all my heart." "Why should you want to rob her of her relations, Mr. Spooner?" Because I don't want to say a word against her, Lady Chiltern. To me she is perfect as a star, beautiful as a rose." Mr. Spooner, as he said this, pointed first to the heavens and then to the earth. "But perhaps she wouldn't have been so proud of her grandfather hadn't he been a duke." "I don't think she is proud of that." "People do think of it, Lady Chiltern, and I don't say that they ought not. Of course it makes a difference, and when a man lives altogether in the country, as I do, it seems to signify so much more. But if you go back to old county families, Lady Chiltern, the Spooners have been here pretty nearly as long as the Pallisers, if not longer. The Desponders, from whom we come, came over with William the Conqueror. I have always heard that there isn't a more respectable family in the county." "That there isn't. There was a grant of land which took their name and became the Manor of Despond. There's where Spoon Hall is now. Sir Thomas Desponder was one of those who demanded the charter, though his name wasn't always given because he wasn't a baron. Perhaps Miss Palliser does not know all that." "I doubt whether she cares about those things." "Women do care about them very much. Perhaps she has heard of the two spoons crossed, and doesn't know that that was a stupid, vulgar, practical joke. Our crest is a knight's head bowed with the motto Desperandum. Soon after the conquest, one of the Desponders fell in love with the Queen, and never would give it up, though it wasn't any good. Her name was Matilda, and so he went as a crusader and got killed. But wherever he went he had the knight's head bowed and the motto on the shield." "What a romantic story, Mr. Spooner." "Isn't it? And it's quite true. That's the way we became Spooners. I never told her of it, but somehow I wish I had now. It always seemed that she didn't think that I was anybody. The truth is, Mr. Spooner, that she was always thinking that somebody else was everything. When a gentleman is told that a lady's affections have been pre-engaged, however much he may regret the circumstances, he cannot, I think, feel any hurt to his pride. If I understand the matter, Miss Palliser explained to you that she was engaged when first you spoke to her. You are speaking of young Gerard Maule. Of course I am speaking of Mr. Maule. But she has quarrelled with him, Lady Chiltern. Don't you know what such quarrels come to? Well, no. That is to say, everybody tells me that it is really broken off, and that he has gone nobody knows where. At any rate, he never shows himself. He doesn't mean it, Lady Chiltern. I don't know what he means. And he can't afford it, Lady Chiltern. I mean it, and I can afford it. Surely that might go for something. I cannot say what Mr. Maule may mean to do, Mr. Spooner, but I think it only fair to tell you that he is at present staying at Matching under the same roof with Miss Palliser. Maule staying at the Duke's! When Mr. Spooner heard this, there came a sudden change over his face. His jaw fell, and his mouth was opened, and the redness of his cheeks flew up to his forehead. He was expected there yesterday, and I need hardly suggest to you what will be the end of the quarrel. Going to the Duke's won't give him an income. I know nothing about that, Mr. Spooner, but it really seems to me that you misinterpret the nature of the affections of such a girl as Miss Palliser. Do you think it is likely that she should cease to love a man because he is not so rich as another? People, when they are married, want a house to live in, Lady Chiltern. Now at Spoon Hall— Believe me, that is in vain, Mr. Spooner. You are quite sure of it? Quite sure. I'd have done anything for her, anything. She might have had what settlement she pleased. I told Ned that he must go if she made a point of it. I'd have gone abroad, or lived just anywhere. I'd come to that I didn't mind the hunting a bit. I'm sorry for you, I am indeed. It cuts a fellow all to pieces so. And yet what is it all about? A slip of a girl that isn't anything so very much out of the way after all. Lady Chiltern, I shouldn't care if a horse kicked the trap all to pieces going back to Spoon Hall, and me with it. You'll get over it, Mr. Spooner. Get over it. I suppose I shall, but I shall never be as I was. I've been always thinking of the day when there must be a lady at Spoon Hall, and putting it off, you know. There'll never be a lady there now. Never. You don't think there's any chance at all. I'm sure there is none. I'd give half I've got in all the world, said the wretched man, just to get it out of my head. I know what it will come to. Though he paused, Lady Chiltern could ask no question respecting Mr. Spooner's future prospects. It'll be 2 bottles of champagne at dinner, and 2 bottles of claret afterwards, every day. I only hope she'll know that she did it. Good-bye, Lady Chiltern. I thought that perhaps you'd have helped me. I cannot help you. Good-bye. So he went down to his trap and drove himself violently home, without, however, achieving the ruin which he desired. Let us hope that as time cures his wound, that threat as to increased consumption of wine may fall to the ground unfulfilled. In the meantime, Gerard Maule had arrived at Matching Priory. "We have quarrelled," Adelaide had said when the Duchess told her that her lover was to come. "Then you had better make it up again," the Duchess had answered, and there had been an end of it. Nothing more was done, no arrangement was made, and Adelaide was left to meet the man as best she might. The quarrel to her had been as the disruption of the heavens. She had declared to herself that she would bear it, but the misfortune to be born was a broken world falling about her own ears. She had thought of a nunnery, of Ophelia among the water lilies, and of an early deathbed. Then she had pictured to herself the somewhat ascetic and very laborious life of an old maiden lady, whose only recreation 50 years hence should consist in looking at the portrait of him who had once been her lover. And now she was told that he was coming to Matching as though nothing had been the matter. She tried to think whether it was not her duty to have her things at once packed, and ask for a carriage to take her to the railway station. But she was in the house of her nearest relative, of him and also of her who were bound to see that things were right. And then there might be a more pleasurable existence than that which would have to depend on a photograph for its keenest delight. But how should she meet him? In what way should she address him? Should she ignore the quarrel, or recognize it, or take some milder course? She was half afraid of the Duchess, and could not ask for assistance. And the Duchess, though good-natured, seemed to her to be rough. There was nobody at Matching to whom she could say a word, so she lived on and trembled and doubted from hour to hour whether the world would not come to an end. The Duchess was rough, but she was very good-natured. She had contrived that the two lovers should be brought into the same house, and did not doubt at all but what they would be able to adjust their own little differences when they met. Her experiences of the world had certainly made her more alive to the material prospects than to the delicate aroma of a love adventure. She had been greatly knocked about herself, and the material prospects had come uppermost. But all that had happened to her had tended to open her hand to other people, and had enabled her to be good-natured with delight, even when she knew that her friends imposed upon her. She didn't care much for Lawrence Fitzgibbon, but when she was told that the lady with money would not consent to marry the aristocratic pauper, except on condition that she should be received at Matching, the Duchess at once gave the invitation. And now, though she couldn't go into the fall-lollery, as she called it, to Madame Goesler, of setting a meeting between two young people who had fallen out, she worked hard till she accomplished something perhaps more important to their future happiness. "Plantagenet," she said, "there can be no objection to your cousin having that money." "My dear!" "Oh, come, you must remember about Adelaide and that young man who is coming here to-day." "You told me that Adelaide is to be married. I don't know anything about the young man. His name is Maule, and he is a gentleman, and all that. Some day, when his father dies, he'll have a small property somewhere." "I hope he has a profession." "No, he has not. I told you all that before." "If he has nothing at all, Glencora, why did he ask a young lady to marry him?" "Oh, dear, what's the good of going into all that? He has got something. They'll do immensely well, if you'll only listen. She is your first cousin." "Of course she is," said Plantagenet, lifting up his hand to his hair. "And you are bound to do something for her." "No, I am not bound, but I am very willing, if you wish it. Put the thing on a right footing." "I hate footings. That is, right footings. We can manage this without taking money out of your pocket." "My dear Glencora, if I am to give my cousin money, I shall do so by putting my hand into my own pocket, in preference to that of any other person. Madame Goesler says that she'll sign all the papers about the Duke's legacy, the money, I mean, if she may be allowed to make it over to the Duke's niece." Of course, Madame Goesler may do what she likes with her own. I cannot hinder her. But I would rather that you should not interfere. £25,000 is a very serious sum of money. You won't take it. Certainly not. Nor will Madame Goesler, and therefore there can be no reason why these young people should not have it. Of course, Adelaide, being the Duke's niece, does make a difference. Why else should I care about it? She is nothing to me, and as for him, I shouldn't know him again if I were to meet him in the street. And so the thing was settled. The Duke was powerless against the energy of his wife, and the lawyer was instructed that Madame Goesler would take the proper steps for putting herself into possession of the Duke's legacy, as far as the money was concerned, with the view of transferring it to the Duke's niece, Miss Adelaide Palliser. As for the diamonds, the difficulty could not be solved. Madame Goesler still refused to take them, and desired her lawyer to instruct her as to the form by which she could most thoroughly and conclusively renounce that legacy. Gerard Maule had his ideas about the meeting, which would, of course, take place at Matching. He would not, he thought, have been asked there had it not been intended that he should marry Adelaide. He did not care much for the grandeur of the Duke and Duchess, but he was conscious of certain profitable advantages which might accrue from such an acknowledgment of his position from the great relatives of his intended bride. It would be something to be married from the house of the Duchess, and to receive his wife from the Duke's hand. His father would probably be driven to acquiesce, and people who were almost omnipotent in the world would at any rate give him a start. He expected no money, nor did he possess that character, whether it be good or bad, which is given to such expectation. But there would be encouragement, and the thing would probably be done. As for the meeting, he would take her in his arms if he found her alone, and beg her pardon for that cross word about Boulogne. He would assure her that Boulogne itself would be a heaven to him if she were with him, and he thought that she would believe him. When he reached the house, he was asked into a room in which a lot of people were playing billiards, or crowded around a billiard table. The Chilterns were gone, and he was at first ill at ease, finding no friend. Madame Goesler, who had met him at Harrington, came up to him and told him that the Duchess would be there directly, and then Phineas, who had been playing at the moment of his entrance, shook hands with him, and said a word or two about the Chilterns. "I was so delighted to hear of your acquittal," said Maule. "We never talk about that now," said Phineas, going back to his stroke. Adelaide Palliser was not present, and the difficulty of the meeting had not yet been encountered. They all remained in the billiard-room till it was time for the ladies to dress, and Adelaide had not yet ventured to show herself. Somebody offered to take him to his room, and he was conducted upstairs and told that they dined at 8, but nothing had been arranged. Nobody as yet mentioned her name to him. Surely it could not be that she had gone away when she heard that he was coming, and that she was really determined to make the quarrel perpetual. He had 3/4 of an hour in which to get dressed for dinner, and he felt himself to be uncomfortable and out of his element. He had been sent to his chamber prematurely because nobody had known what to do with him, and he wished himself back in London. The Duchess, no doubt, had intended to be good-natured, but she had made a mistake. So he sat by his open window and looked out on the ruins of the old priory, which were close to the house, and wondered why he mightn't have been allowed to wander about the garden, instead of being shut up there in a bedroom. But he felt that it would be unwise to attempt any escape now. He would meet the Duke or the Duchess, or perhaps Adelaide herself, in some of the passages, and there would be an embarrassment. So he dawdled away the time, looking out of the window as he dressed, and descended to the drawing-room at 8 o'clock. He shook hands with the Duke, and was welcomed by the Duchess, and then glanced round the room. There she was, seated on a sofa between two other ladies, of whom one was his friend, Madame Goesler. It was essentially necessary that he should notice her in some way, and he walked up to her and offered her his hand. It was impossible that he should allude to what was past, and he merely muttered something as he stood over her. She had blushed up to her eyes, and was absolutely dumb. "Mr. Maule, perhaps you'll take our cousin Adelaide out to dinner," said the Duchess, a moment afterwards, whispering in his ear. "Have you forgiven me?" he said to her, as they passed from one room to the other. "I will, if you care to be forgiven." The Duchess had been quite right, and the quarrel was all over without any arrangement. On the following morning he was allowed to walk about the grounds without any impediment, and to visit the ruins which had looked so charming to him from the window. Nor was he alone. Miss Palliser was now by no means anxious, as she had been yesterday, to keep out of the way, and was willingly persuaded to show him all the beauties of the place. "I shouldn't have said what I did, I know," pleaded Maule. "Never mind it now, Gerard. I mean about going to Boulogne. It did sound so melancholy. But I only meant that we should have to be very careful how we lived. I don't know quite whether I am so good at being careful about money as a fellow ought to be. You must take a lesson from me, sir. I have sent the horses to Tattersall's," he said in a tone that was almost funereal. "What, already? I gave the order yesterday. They are to be sold. I don't know when. They won't fetch anything. They never do. One always buys bad horses there for a lot of money, and sells good ones for nothing. Where the difference goes to I never could make out. I suppose the man gets it who sells them. No, he don't. The fellows get it who have their eyes open. My eyes never were open, except as far as seeing you went. Perhaps if you had opened them wider you wouldn't have to go to— Don't, Adelaide. But as far as I was saying about the horses, when they're sold of course the bills won't go on, and I suppose things will come right. I don't owe so very much. I've got something to tell you," she said. "What about?" "You're to see my cousin to-day at 2 o'clock." "The Duke?" "Yes, the Duke, and he has got a proposition. I don't know that you need sell your horses, as it seems to make you so very unhappy. You remember Madame Goesler?" "Of course I do. She was at Harrington." "There's something about a legacy which I can't understand at all. It is ever so much money, and it did belong to the old Duke. They say it is to be mine, or yours rather, if we should ever be married. And then, you know, Gerard, perhaps after all you needn't go to Boulogne." So she took her revenge, and he had his, as he pressed his arm round her waist and kissed her among the ruins of the old priory. Precisely at 2 to the moment he had his interview with the Duke, and very disagreeable it was to both of them. The Duke was bound to explain that the magnificent present which was being made to his cousin was a gift, not from him, but from Madame Goesler, and though he was intent on making this as plain as possible, he did not like the task. "The truth is, Mr. Maule, that Madame Goesler is unwilling, for reasons with which I need not trouble you, to take the legacy which was left to her by my uncle. I think her reasons to be insufficient, but it is a matter in which she must, of course, judge for herself. She has decided, very much, I fear, at my wife's instigation, which I must own I regret, to give the money to one of our family, and has been pleased to say that my cousin Adelaide shall be the recipient of her bounty. I have nothing to do with it. I cannot stop her generosity if I would, nor can I say that my cousin ought to refuse it. Adelaide will have the entire sum as her fortune, short of the legacy duty, which, as you are probably aware, will be 10 per cent, as Madame Goesler was not related to my uncle. The money will, of course, be settled on my cousin and on her children. I believe that will be all I shall have to say, except that Lady Glencora, the Duchess I mean, wishes that Adelaide should be married from our house. If this be so, I shall, of course, hope to have the honour of giving my cousin away. The Duke was by no means a pompous man, and probably there was no man in England of so high rank who thought so little of his rank. But he was stiff and somewhat ungainly, and the task which he was called upon to execute had been very disagreeable to him. He bowed when he had finished his speech, and Gerard Maule felt himself bound to go almost without expressing his thanks. "My dear Mr. Maule," said Madame Goesler, "you literally must not say a word to me about it. The money was not mine, and under no circumstances would or could be mine. I have given nothing, and could not have presumed to make such a present. The money, I take it, does undoubtedly belong to the present Duke, and as he does not want it, it is very natural that it should go to his cousin. I trust that you may both live to enjoy it long, but I cannot allow any thanks to be given to me by either of you." After that he tried the Duchess, who was somewhat more gracious. "The truth is, Mr. Maule, you are a very lucky man to find 20,000 pounds and more going begging about the country in that way." "Indeed I am, Duchess. And Adelaide is lucky too, for I doubt whether either of you are given to any very penetrating economies. I am told that you like hunting." "I have sent my horses to Tattersall's." "There is enough now for a little hunting, I suppose, unless you have a dozen children. And now you and Adelaide must settle when it's to be. I hate things to be delayed. People go on quarrelling and fancying this and that, and thinking that the world is full of romance and poetry. When they get married they know better." "I hope the romance and poetry do not all vanish." "Romance and poetry are for the most part lies, Mr. Maule, and are very apt to bring people into difficulty. I have seen something of them in my time, and I much prefer downright honest figures. 2 and 2 make 4. Idleness is the root of all evil. Love your neighbour like yourself, and the rest of it. Pray remember that Adelaide is to be married from here, and that we shall be very happy that you should make every use you like of our house until then. We may so far anticipate in our story as to say that Adelaide Palliser and Gerard Maule were married from Matching Priory at Matching Church early in that October, and that as far as the coming winter was concerned, there certainly was no hunting for the gentlemen. They went to Naples instead of Boulogne, and there remained till the warm weather came in the following spring. Nor was that peremptory sale at Tattersall's countermanded as regarding any of the horses. What prices were realized the present writer has never been able to ascertain. End of chapter 76. Chapter 77 of Phineas Redux by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Deon Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Phineas Finn's Success. When Phineas Finn had been about a week at Matching, he received a letter, or rather a very short note, from the Prime Minister, asking him to go up to London, and on the same day the Duke of Omnium spoke to him on the subject of the letter. "You are going up to see Mr. Gresham. Mr. Gresham has written to me, and I hope that we shall be able to congratulate ourselves in having your assistance next session." Phineas declared that he had no idea whatever of Mr. Gresham's object in summoning him up to London. "I have his permission to inform you that he wishes you to accept office." Phineas felt that he was becoming very red in the face, but he did not attempt to make any reply on the spur of the moment. "Mr. Gresham thinks it well that so much should be said to you before you see him, in order that you may turn the matter over in your own mind. He would have written to you probably, making the offer at once, had it not been that there must be various changes, and that one man's place must depend on another. You will go, I suppose?" "Yes, I shall go certainly. I shall be in London this evening." "I will take care that a carriage is ready for you. I do not presume to advise Mr. Finn, but I hope that there need be no doubt as to your joining us." Phineas was somewhat confounded, and did not know the Duke well enough to give expression to his thoughts at the moment. "Of course you will return to us, Mr. Finn?" Phineas said that he would return, and trespass on the Duke's hospitality for yet a few days. He was quite resolved that something must be said to Madame Goesler before he left the roof under which she was living. In the course of the autumn she purposed, as she had told him, to go to Vienna, and to remain there almost up to Christmas. Whatever there might be to be said should be said at any rate before that. He did speak a few words to her before his journey to London, but in those words there was no allusion made to the great subject which must be discussed between them. "I am going up to London," he said. "So the Duchess tells me. Mr. Gresham has sent for me, meaning, I suppose, to offer me the place which he would not give me while that poor man was alive." "And you will accept it, of course, Mr. Finn?" "I am not at all so sure of that." "But you will. You must. You will hardly be so foolish as to let the peevish animosity of an ill-conditioned man prejudice your prospects even after his death. It will not be any remembrance of Mr. Bonteen that will induce me to refuse. It will be the same thing, rancour against Mr. Gresham because he had allowed the other man's counsel to prevail with him. The action of no individual man should be to you of sufficient consequence to guide your conduct. If you accept office, you should not take it as a favour conferred by the Prime Minister, nor if you refuse it, should you do so from personal feelings in regard to him. If he selects you, he is presumed to do so because he finds that your services will be valuable to your country. He does so because he thinks that I should be safe to vote for him. That may be so or not. You can't read his bosom quite distinctly, but you may read your own. If you go into office, you become the servant of the country, not his servant, and should assume his motive in selecting you to be the same as your own in submitting to the selection. Your foot must be on the ladder before you can get to the top of it. The ladder is so crooked. Is it more crooked now than it was 3 years ago? Worse than it was 6 months ago, when you and all your friends looked upon it as certain that you would be employed? There is nothing, Mr. Finn, that a man should fear so much as some twist in his convictions, arising from a personal accident to himself. When we heard that the devil in his sickness wanted to be a monk, we never thought that he would become a saint in glory. When a man who has been rejected by a lady expresses a general ill opinion of the sex, we are apt to ascribe his opinions to disappointment rather than to judgment. A man falls and breaks his leg at a fence, and cannot be induced to ride again, not because he thinks the amusement to be dangerous, but because he cannot keep his mind from dwelling on the hardship that has befallen himself. In all such cases, self-consciousness gets the better of the judgment. You think it will be so with me. I shall think so if you now refuse, because of the misfortune which befell you, that which I know you were most desirous of possessing before that accident. To tell you the truth, Mr. Finn, I wish Mr. Gresham had delayed his offer till the winter. And why? Because by that time you will have recovered your health. Your mind now is morbid and out of tune. There was something to make it so, Madame Goesler. God knows there was, and the necessity which lay before you of bearing a bold front during those long and terrible weeks of course consumed your strength. The wonder is that the fibers of your mind should have retained any of their elasticity after such an ordeal. But as you are so strong, it would be a pity that you should not be strong altogether. This thing that is now to be offered to you is what you have always desired. A man may have always desired that which is worthless. You tried it once and did not find it worthless. You found yourself able to do good work when you were in office. If I remember right, you did not give it up then because it was irksome to you, or contemptible, or, as you say, worthless, but from difference of opinion on some political question. You can always do that again. A man is not fit for office who is prone to do so. Then do not you be prone. It means success or failure in the profession which you have chosen, and I shall greatly regret to see you damage your chance of success by yielding to scruples which have come upon you when you are hardly as yet yourself. She had spoken to him very plainly, and he had found it to be impossible to answer her, and yet she had hardly touched the motives by which he believed himself to be actuated. As he made his journey up to London, he thought very much of her words. There had been nothing said between them about money. No allusion had been made to the salary of the office which would be offered to him, or to the terrible shortness of his own means of living. He knew well enough himself that he must take some final step in life, or very shortly return into absolute obscurity. This woman who had been so strongly advising him to take a certain course as to his future life was very rich, and he had fully decided that he would sooner or later ask her to be his wife. He knew well that all her friends regarded their marriage as certain. The Duchess had almost told him so in as many words. Lady Chiltern, who was much more to him than the Duchess, had assured him that if he should have a wife to bring with him to Harrington, the wife would be welcome. Of what other wife could Lady Chiltern have thought? Lawrence Fitzgibbon, when congratulated on his own marriage, had returned counter-congratulations. Mr. Lowe had said that it would of course come to pass. Even Mrs. Bunch had hinted at it, suggesting that she would lose her lodger and be a wretched woman. All the world had heard of the journey to Prague, and all the world expected the marriage, and he had come to love the woman with excessive affection day by day ever since the renewal of their intimacy at Brufton Spinnies. His mind was quite made up, but he was by no means so sure of her mind as the rest of the world might be. He knew of her what nobody else in the world knew except himself. In that former period of his life, on which he now sometimes looked back as though it had been passed in another world, this woman had offered her hand and fortune to him. She had done so in the enthusiasm of her love, knowing his ambition and knowing his poverty, and believing that her wealth was necessary to the success of his career in life, he had refused the offer, and they had parted without a word. Now they had come together again, and she was certainly among the dearest of his friends. Had she not taken that wondrous journey to Prague in his behalf, and been the first among those who had striven at last successfully, to save his neck from the halter? Dear to her! He knew well, as he sat with his eyes closed in the railway carriage, that he must be dear to her. But might it not be well that she had resolved that friendship should take the place of love? And it was not compatible with her nature, with all human nature, that in spite of her regard for him, she should choose to be revenged for the evil which had befallen her, when she offered her hand in vain. He must know by this time that he intended to throw himself at her feet, and would hardly have advised him as she had done as to the necessity of following up that success which had hitherto been so essential to him, had she intended to give him all that she had once offered him before. It might well be that Lady Chiltern and even the Duchess should be mistaken. Marie Goesler was not a woman, he thought, to reveal the deeper purposes of her life to any such friend as the Duchess of Omnium. Of his own feelings in regard to the offer which was about to be made to him, he had hardly succeeded in making her understand anything. That a change had come upon himself was certain, but he did not at all believe that it had sprung from any weakness caused by his sufferings in regard to the murder. He rather believed that he had become stronger than weaker from all that he had endured. He had learned when he was younger, some years back, to regard the political service of his country as a profession in which a man possessed of certain gifts might earn his bread with more gratification to himself than in any other. The work would be hard, and the emolument only intermittent, but the service would in itself be pleasant, and the rewards of that service, should he be so successful as to obtain reward, would be dearer to him than anything which could accrue to him from other labors. To sit in the cabinet for one session would, he then thought, be more to him than to preside over the court of Queen's Bench, as long as did Lord Mansfield. But during the last few months a change had crept across his dream, which he recognized but could hardly analyze. He had seen a man whom he despised promoted, and the place to which the man had been exalted had at once become contemptible in his eyes, and there had been quarrels and jangling and the speaking of evil words between men who should have been quiet and dignified. No doubt Madame Goesler was right in attributing the revulsion in his hopes to see Mr. Bonteen and Mr. Bonteen's enmity, but Phineas Finn himself did not know that it was so. He arrived in town in the evening, and his appointment with Mr. Gresham was for the following morning. He breakfasted at his club, and there he received the following letter from Lady Laura Kennedy. Salisbury, 28th August, 18. My dear Phineas, I have just received a letter from Barrington in which he tells me that Mr. Gresham is going to offer you your old place at the Colonies. He says that Lord Fawn has been so upset by this affair of Lady Eustace's husband that he is obliged to resign and go abroad. This was the first intimation that Phineas had heard of the nature of the office to be offered to him. But Barrington goes on to say that he thinks you won't accept Mr. Gresham's offer, and he asks me to write to you. Can this possibly be true? Barrington writes most kindly, with true friendship, and is most anxious for you to join. But he thinks that you are angry with Mr. Gresham because he passed you over before, and that you will not forgive him for having yielded to Mr. Bonteen. I can hardly believe this possible. Surely you will not allow the shade of that unfortunate man to blight your prospects. And after all, of what matter to you is the friendship or enmity of Mr. Gresham? You have to assert yourself, to make your own way, to use your own opportunities, and to fight your own battles without reference to the feelings of individuals. Men act together in office constantly, and with constancy, who are known to hate each other. When there are so many to get what is going, and so little to be given, of course there will be struggling and trampling. I have no doubt that Lord Cantrip has made a point of this with Mr. Gresham, has in point of fact insisted upon it. If so, you are lucky to have such an ally as Lord Cantrip. He and Mr. Gresham are, as you know, sworn friends, and if you get on well with the one, you certainly may with the other also. Pray do not refuse without asking for time to think about it, and if so, pray come here, that you may consult my father. I spent 2 weary weeks at Loughlinter, and then could stand it no longer. I have come here, and here I shall remain for the autumn and winter. If I can sell my interest in the Loughlinter property, I shall do so, as I am sure that neither the place nor the occupation is fit for me. Indeed, I know not what place or what occupation will suit me. The dreariness of the life before me is hardly preferable to the disappointments I have already endured. There seems to be nothing left for me but to watch my father to the end. The world would say that such a duty in life is fit for a widowed, childless daughter. But to you I cannot pretend to say that my bereavement or misfortunes reconcile me to such a fate. I cannot cease to remember my age, my ambition, and I will say my love. I suppose that everything is over for me, as though I were an old woman going down into the grave. But at my time of life I find it hard to believe that it must be so. And then the time of waiting may be so long. I suppose I could start a house in London and get people around me by feeding and flattering them and by little intrigues, like that woman of whom you are so fond. It is money that is chiefly needed for that work, and of money I have enough now, and people would know at any rate who I am. But I could not flatter them, and I should wish the food to choke them if they did not please me. And you would not come, and if you did, I may as well say it boldly, others would not. An ill-natured sprite has been busy with me, which seems to deny me everything which is so freely granted to others. As for you, the world is at your feet. I dread 2 things for you, that you should marry unworthily, and that you should injure your prospects in public life by an uncompromising stiffness. On the former subject I can say nothing to you. As to the latter, let me implore you to come down here before you decide upon anything. Of course you can at once accept Mr. Gresham's offer, and that is what you should do, unless the office proposed to you be unworthy of you. No friend of yours will think that your old place at the colonies should be rejected. But if your mind is still turned towards refusing, ask Mr. Gresham to give you 3 or 4 days for decision, and then come here. He cannot refuse you, nor after all that is past can you refuse me. Yours affectionately, L.K. When he had read this letter, he at once acknowledged to himself that he could not refuse her request. He must go to Salisbury, and he must do so at once. He was about to see Mr. Gresham immediately, within half an hour, and as he could not expect at the most above 24 hours to be allowed to him for consideration, he must go down to Salisbury on the same evening. As he walked to the Prime Minister's house, he called at a telegraph office and sent down his message. I shall be at Salisbury by the train arriving at 7 p.m. send to meet me." Then he went on, and in a few minutes found himself in the presence of the great man. The great man received him with an excellent courtesy. It is the special business of prime ministers to be civil in detail, though roughness, and perhaps almost rudeness in the gross, becomes not unfrequently a necessity of their position. To a proposed incoming subordinate, a prime minister is, of course, very civil, and to a retreating subordinate he is generally more so, unless the retreat be made under unfavorable circumstances, and to give good things is always pleasant, unless there be a suspicion that the good thing will be thought to be not good enough. No such suspicion as that now crossed the mind of Mr. Gresham. He had been pressed very much by various colleagues to admit this young man into the paradise of his government, and had been pressed very much also to exclude him, and this had been continued till he had come to dislike the name of the young man. He did believe that the young man had behaved badly to Mr. Robert Kennedy, and he knew that the young man, on one occasion, had taken to kicking in harness and running a course of his own. He had decided against the young man, very much, no doubt, at the instance of Mr. Bonteen, and he believed that in so doing he closed the gates of paradise against a Peri most anxious to enter it. He now stood with the key in his hand and the gate open, and the seat to be allotted to the reaccepted one was that which he believed the Peri would most gratefully fill. He began by making a little speech about Mr. Bonteen. That was almost unavoidable, and he praised in glowing words the attitude which Phineas had maintained during the trial. He had been delighted with the re-election at Tankerville, and thought that the borough had done itself much honour. Then came forth his proposition. Lord Fawn had retired, absolutely broken down by repeated examinations respecting the man in the grey coat, and the office which Phineas had before held with so much advantage to the public and comfort to his immediate chief, Lord Cantrip, was there for his acceptance. Mr. Gresham went on to express an ardent hope that he might have the benefit of Mr. Finn's services. It was quite manifest from his manner that he did not in the least doubt the nature of the reply which he would receive. Phineas had come primed with his answer, so ready with it that it did not even seem to be the result of any hesitation at the moment. "I hope, Mr. Gresham, that you will be able to give me a few hours to think of this." Mr. Gresham's face fell, for in truth he wanted an immediate answer, and though he knew from experience that secretaries of state and first lords and chancellors do demand time, and will often drive very hard bargains before they will consent to get into harness, he considered that under-secretaries, junior lords, and the like, should skip about as they were bidden, and take the crumbs offered them without delay. If every underling wanted a few hours to think about it, how could any government ever be got together? "I am sorry to put you to inconvenience," continued Phineas, seeing that the great man was but ill satisfied, "but I am so placed that I cannot avail myself of your flattering kindness without some little time for consideration. I had hoped that the office was one which you would like." "So it is, Mr. Gresham." "And I was told that you are now free from any scruples, political scruples, I mean, which might make it difficult for you to support the government." "Since the government came to our way of thinking, a year or two ago, about tenant right, I mean, I do not know that there is any subject on which I am likely to oppose it. Perhaps I had better tell you the truth, Mr. Gresham." "Oh, certainly," said the Prime Minister, who knew very well that on such occasions nothing could be worse than the telling of disagreeable truths. "When you came into office, after beating Mr. Daubeny on the church question, No man in Parliament was more desirous of place than I was, and I am sure that none of the disappointed ones felt their disappointment so keenly. It was aggravated by various circumstances, by calumnies in newspapers, and by personal bickerings. I need not go into that wretched story of Mr. Bonteen, and the absurd accusation which grew out of those calumnies. These feelings have changed me very much. I have a feeling that I have been ill-used, not by you, Mr. Gresham, specially, but by the party, and I look upon the whole question of office with altered eyes. In filling up the places at his disposal, a Prime Minister, Mr. Finn, has a most unenviable task. I can well believe it. When circumstances, rather than any selection of his own, indicate the future occupant of any office, this abrogation of his patronage is the greatest blessing in the world to him. I can believe that also. I wish it were so with every office under the crown. A minister is rarely thanked, and would as much look for the peace of heaven in his office as for gratitude. I am sorry that I should have made no exception to such thanklessness. We shall neither of us get on by complaining, shall we, Mr. Finn? You can let me have an answer, perhaps, by this time to-morrow. If an answer by telegraph will be sufficient. Quite sufficient. Yes or no. Nothing more will be wanted. You understand your own reasons, no doubt, fully, but if they were stated at length, they would perhaps hardly enlighten me. Good morning." Then, as Phineas was turning his back, the Prime Minister remembered that it behoved him as Prime Minister to repress his temper. "I shall still hope, Mr. Finn, for a favourable answer." Had it not been for that last word, Phineas would have turned again, and at once rejected the proposition. From Mr. Gresham's house he went by appointment to Mr. Monk's, and told him of the interview. Mr. Monk's advice to him had been exactly the same as that given by Madame Goesler and Lady Laura. Phineas, indeed, understood perfectly that no friend could or would give him any other advice. "He has his troubles too," said Mr. Monk, speaking of the Prime Minister. "A man can hardly expect to hold such an office without trouble. Labour, of course, there must be, though I doubt whether it is so great as that of some other persons, and responsibility. The amount of trouble depends on the spirit and nature of the man. Do you remember old Lord Brock? He was never troubled. He had a triple shield, a thick skin, an equable temper, and perfect self-confidence. Mr. Mildmay was of a softer temper, and would have suffered had he not been protected by the idolatry of a large class of his followers. Mr. Gresham has no such protection. With a finer intellect than either, and a sense of patriotism quite as keen, he has a self-consciousness which makes him sore at every point. He knows the frailty of his temper, and yet cannot control it. And he does not understand men as did these others. Every word from an enemy is a wound to him. Every slight from a friend is a dagger in his side. But I can fancy that self-accusations make the cross on which he is really crucified. He is a man to whom I would extend all my mercy, were it in my power to be merciful. You will hardly tell me that I should accept office under him by way of obliging him. Were I you, I should do so, not to oblige him, but because I know him to be an honest man." "I care but little for honesty," said Phineas, "which is at the disposal of those who are dishonest. What am I to think of a minister who would allow himself to be led by Mr. Bonteen?" Chapter 77. Chapter 78 of Phineas Redux by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Deon Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. The last visit to Salisbury. Phineas, as he journeyed down to Salisbury, knew that he had in truth made up his mind. He was going thither nominally that he might listen to the advice of almost his oldest political friend before he resolved on a matter of vital importance to himself. But in truth he was making the visit because he felt that he could not excuse himself from it without unkindness and ingratitude. She had implored him to come, and he was bound to go, and there were tidings to be told which he must tell. It was not only that he might give her his reasons for not becoming an Under-Secretary of State that he went to Salisbury. He felt himself bound to inform her that he intended to ask Marie Goesler to be his wife. He might omit to do so till he had asked the question, and then say nothing of what he had done should his petition be refused. But it seemed to him that there would be cowardice in this. He was bound to treat Lady Laura as his friend in a special degree, as something more than his sister, and he was bound above all things to make her understand in some plainest manner that she could be nothing more to him than such a friend. In his dealings with her he had endeavored always to be honest, gentle as well as honest, but now it was specially his duty to be honest to her. When he was young he had loved her, and had told her so, and she had refused him. As a friend he had been true to her ever since, but that offer could never be repeated, and the other offer, to the woman whom she was now accustomed to abuse, must be made. Should Lady Laura choose to quarrel with him, it must be so, but the quarrel should not be of his seeking. He was quite sure that he would refuse Mr. Gresham's offer, although by doing so he would himself throw away the very thing which he had devoted his life to acquire. In a foolish, soft moment, he now confessed to himself, he had endeavored to obtain for his own position the sympathy of the minister. He had spoken of the calumnies which had hurt him, and of his sufferings when he found himself excluded from place in consequence of the evil stories which had been told of him. Mr. Gresham had, in fact, declined to listen to him, had said yes or no was all that he required, and had gone on to explain that he would be unable to understand the reasons proposed to be given, even were he to hear them. Phineas had felt himself to be repulsed, and would at once have shown his anger, had not the Prime Minister silenced him for the moment by a civilly worded repetition of the offer made. But the offer should certainly be declined. As he told himself that it must be so, he endeavored to analyze the causes of this decision, but was hardly successful. He had thought that he could explain the reasons to the minister, but found himself incapable of explaining them to himself. In regard to means of subsistence, he was no better off now than when he began the world. He was, indeed, without encumbrance, but was also without any means of procuring an income. For the last 12 months he had been living on his little capital, and 2 years more of such life would bring him to the end of all that he had. There was, no doubt, one view of his prospects which was bright enough. If Marie Goesler accepted him, he need not, at any rate, look about for the means of earning a living, but he assured himself with perfect confidence that no hope in that direction would have any influence upon the answer he would give to Mr. Gresham. Had not Marie Goesler herself been most urgent with him in begging him to accept the offer, and was he not therefore justified in concluding that she, at least, had thought it necessary that he should earn his bread? Would her heart be softened towards him? Would any further softening be necessary? by his obstinate refusal to comply with her advice. The two things had no reference to each other, and should be regarded by him as perfectly distinct. He would refuse Mr. Gresham's offer, not because he hoped that he might live in idleness on the wealth of the woman he loved, but because the chicaneries and intrigues of office had become distasteful to him. "I don't know which are the falser," he said to himself, "the mock courtesies or the mock indignations of statesmen." He found the Earl's carriage waiting for him at the station, and thought of many former days as he was carried through the little town for which he had sat in Parliament, up to the house which he had once visited in the hope of wooing Violet Effingham. The women whom he had loved had all, at any rate, become his friends, and his thorough friendships were almost all with women. He and Lord Chiltern regarded each other with warm affection, but there was hardly ground for real sympathy between them. It was the same with Mr. Lowe and Barrington Erle. Were he to die, there would be no gap in their lives. Were they to die, there would be none in his. But with Violet Effingham, as he still loved to call her to himself, he thought it would be different. When the carriage stopped at the hall door, he was thinking of her rather than of Lady Laura Kennedy. He was shown at once to his bedroom, the very room in which he had written the letter to Lord Chiltern which had brought about the duel at Blankenberg. He was told that he would find Lady Laura in the drawing-room waiting for dinner for him. The Earl had already dined. "I am so glad you are come," said Lady Laura, welcoming him. "Papa is not very well, and dined early, but I have waited for you, of course." "Of course I have. You did not suppose I would let you sit down alone. I would not see you before you dressed, because I knew that you must be tired and hungry, and that the sooner you got down the better." "Has it not been hot?" "And so dusty. I only left Matching yesterday, and seem to have been on the railway ever since." "Government officials have to take frequent journeys, Mr. Finn. How long will it be before you have to go down to Scotland twice in 1 week, and back as often to form a ministry? Your next journey must be into the dining-room, in making which will you give me your arm?" She was, he thought, lighter in heart and pleasanter in manner than she had been since her return from Dresden. When she had made her little joke about his future ministerial duties, the servant had been in the room, and he had not, therefore, stopped her by a serious answer. And now she was solicitous about his dinner, anxious that he should enjoy the good things set before him, as is the manner of loving women, pressing him to take wine, and playing the good hostess in all things. He smiled, and ate, and drank, and was gracious under her petting, but he had a weight on his bosom, knowing, as he did, that he must say that before long which would turn all her playfulness either to anger or to grief. "And who had you at Matching?" she asked. "Just the usual set." "Minus the poor old Duke." "Yes, minus the old Duke, certainly. The greatest change is in the name. Lady Glencora was so specially Lady Glencora that she ought to have been Lady Glencora to the end. Everybody calls her Duchess, but it does not sound half so nice." "And is he altered?" "Not in the least. You can trace the lines of lingering regret upon his countenance when people begrace him. But that is all. There was always about him a simple dignity which made it impossible that any one should slap him on the back. And that, of course, remains. He is the same Planty Pall, but I doubt whether any man ever ventured to call him Planty Pall to his face since he left Eton. The house was full, I suppose?" "There were a great many there, among others Sir Gregory Grogram, who apologized to me for having tried to put an end to my career." "Oh, Phineas!" and Sir Harry Coldfoot, who seemed to take some credit to himself for having allowed the jury to acquit me, and Chiltern and his wife were there for a day or two. What could take Oswald there? An embassy of state about the Foxes. The Duke's property runs into his country. She is one of the best women that ever lived. Violet? And one of the best wives. She ought to be, for she is one of the happiest. What can she wish for that she has not got? Was your great friend there? He knew well what great friend she meant. Madame Max Goesler was there. I suppose so. I can never quite forgive Lady Glencora for her intimacy with that woman. Do not abuse her, Lady Laura. I do not intend, not to you at any rate, but I can better understand that she should receive the admiration of a gentleman than the affectionate friendship of a lady. That the old Duke should have been infatuated was intelligible. She was very good to the old Duke. But it was a kind of goodness which was hardly likely to recommend itself to his nephew's wife. Never mind, we won't talk about her now. Barrington was there? For a day or two. He seems to be wasting his life. Subordinates in office generally do, I think. Do not say that, Phineas. Some few push through, and one can almost always foretell who the few will be. There are men who are destined always to occupy second-rate places, and who seem also to know their fate. I never heard Earl speak even of an ambition to sit in the cabinet. He likes to be useful. All that part of the business which distresses me is pleasant to him. He is fond of arrangements, and delights in little party successes. Either to effect or to avoid a count-out is a job of work to his taste, and he loves to get the better of the opposition by keeping it in the dark. A successful plot is as dear to him as to a writer of plays, and yet he is never bitter as is Ratler, or unscrupulous as was poor Mr. Bonteen, or full of wrath as is Lord Fawn, nor is he idle like Fitzgibbon. Earl always earns his salary. When I said he was wasting his life, I meant that he did not marry. But perhaps a man in his position had better remain unmarried. Phineas tried to laugh, but hardly succeeded well. That, however, is a delicate subject, and we will not touch it now. If you won't drink any wine, we might as well go into the other room. Nothing had as yet been said on either of the subjects which had brought him to Salisbury, but there had been words which made the introduction of them peculiarly unpleasant. His tidings, however, must be told. "I shall not see Lord Brentford to-night?" he asked, when they were together in the drawing-room. "If you wish it, you can go up to him. He will not come down." "Oh, no, it is only because I must return to-morrow." "To-morrow, Phineas?" "I must do so. I have pledged myself to see Mr. Monk, and others also." "It is a short visit to make to us on my first return home. I hardly expected you at Loughlinter, but I thought that you might have remained a few nights under my father's roof." He could only reassert his assurance that he was bound to be back in London, and explain as best as he might that he had come to Salisbury for a single night, only because he would not refuse her request to him. "I will not trouble you, Phineas, by complaints," she said. "I would give you no cause for complaint if I could avoid it. And now tell me what has passed between you and Mr. Gresham," she said, as soon as the servant had given them coffee. They were sitting by a window which opened down to the ground, and led on to the terrace and to the lawns below. The night was soft, and the air was heavy with the scent of many flowers. It was now past 9, and the sun had set, but there was a bright harvest moon, and the light, though pale, was clear as that of day. "Will you come and take a turn round the garden? We shall be better there than sitting here. I will get my hat. Can I find yours for you?" So they both strolled out down the terrace steps and went forth beyond the gardens into the park, as though they had both intended from the first that it should be so. "I know you have not accepted Mr. Gresham's offer, or you would have told me so." "I have not accepted." "Nor have you refused?" "No, it is still open. I must send my answer by telegram to-morrow, yes or no. Mr. Gresham's time is too precious to admit of more." "Phineas, for heaven's sake, do not allow little feelings to injure you at such a time as this. It is of your own career, not of Mr. Gresham's manners, that you should think." "I have nothing to object to in Mr. Gresham. Yes or no will be quite sufficient." "It must be yes." "It cannot be yes, Lady Laura. That which I desired so ardently 6 months ago has now become so distasteful to me that I cannot accept it. There is an amount of hustling on the Treasury bench which makes a seat there almost ignominious." "Do they hustle more than they did 3 years ago?" "I think they do, or if not, it is more conspicuous to my eyes. I do not say that it need be ignominious. To such a one as was Mr. Palliser it certainly is not so. But it becomes so when a man goes there to get his bread, and has to fight his way as though for bare life. When office first comes, unasked for, almost unexpected, full of the charms which distance lends, it is pleasant enough. The newcomer begins to feel that he too is entitled to rub his shoulders among those who rule the world of Great Britain. But when it has been expected, longed for as I longed for it, asked for by my friends, and refused, when all the world comes to know that you are a suitor for that which should come without any suit, then the pleasantness vanishes." "I thought it was to be your career." "And I hoped so." "What will you do, Phineas? You cannot live without an income." "I must try," he said, laughing. "You will not share with your friend as a friend should?" "No, Lady Laura, that cannot be done." "I do not see why it cannot." "Then you might be independent." "Then I should indeed be dependent." "You are too proud to owe me anything." He wanted to tell her that he was too proud to owe such obligation as she had suggested to any man or any woman, but he hardly knew how to do so, intending as he did to inform her before they returned to the house of his intention to ask Madame Goesler to be his wife. He could discern the difference between enjoying his wife's fortune and taking gifts of money from one who was bound to him by no tie. But to her, in her present mood, he could explain no such distinction. On a sudden he rushed at the matter in his mind. It had to be done, and must be done, before he brought her back to the house. He was conscious that he had in no degree ill-used her. He had in nothing deceived her. He had kept back from her nothing which the truest friendship had called upon him to reveal to her. And yet he knew that her indignation would rise hot within her at his first word. "Laura," he said, forgetting in his confusion to remember her rank, "I had better tell you at once that I have determined to ask Madame Goesler to be my wife." "Oh, then, of course your income is certain." "If you choose to regard my conduct in that light, I cannot help it. I do not think that I deserve such reproach." "Why not tell it all? You are engaged to her." "Not so. I have not yet asked her." "And why do you come to me with the story of your intentions? To me, of all persons in the world? I sometimes think that of all the hearts that ever dwelt within a man's bosom, yours is the hardest." "For God's sake, do not say that of me." "Do you remember when you came to me about Violet?" "To me? To me? I could bear it then, because she was good and earnest, and a woman that I could love even though she robbed me. And I strove for you even against my own heart, against my own brother. I did. But how am I to bear it now? What shall I do now? She is a woman I loathe. Because you do not know her. Not know her? And are your eyes so clear at seeing that you must know her better than others? She was the Duke's mistress. That is untrue, Lady Laura. But what difference does it make to me? I shall be sure that you will have bread to eat, and horses to ride, and a seat in Parliament, without being forced to earn it by your labour. We shall meet no more, of course. I do not think that you can mean that. I will never receive that woman, nor will I cross the sill of her door. Why should I? Should she become my wife, that I would have thought might have been the reason why. Surely, Phineas, no man ever understood a woman so ill as you do. Because I would fain hope that I need not quarrel with my oldest friend? Yes, sir, because you think you can do this without quarrelling. How should I speak to her of you? How listen to what she would tell me? Phineas, you have killed me at last. Why could he not tell her that it was she who had done the wrong when she gave her hand to Robert Kennedy? But he could not tell her, and he was dumb. And so it's settled. No, not settled. Pshaw! I hate your mock modesty. It is settled. You have become far too cautious to risk fortune in such an adventure. Practice has taught you to be perfect. It was to tell me this that you came down here. Partly so. It would have been more generous of you, sir, to have remained away. I did not mean to be ungenerous. Then she suddenly turned upon him, throwing her arms round his neck and burying her face upon his bosom. They were at the moment in the centre of the park, on the grass beneath the trees, and the moon was bright over their heads. He held her to his breast while she sobbed, and then relaxed his hold as she raised herself to look into his face. After a moment she took his hat from his head with one hand, and with the other swept the hair back from his brow. "Oh, Phineas," she said, "oh, my darling, my idol that I have worshipped when I should have worshipped my God." After that they roamed for nearly an hour backwards and forwards beneath the trees, till at last she became calm and almost reasonable. She acknowledged that she had long expected such a marriage, looking forward to it as a great sorrow. She repeated over and over again her assertion that she could not know Madame Goesler as the wife of Phineas, but abstained from further evil words respecting the lady. "It is better that we should be apart," she said at last. "I feel that it is better. When we are both old, if I should live, we may meet again. I knew that it was coming, and we had better part." And yet they remained out there, wandering about the park, for a long portion of the summer night. She did not reproach him again, nor did she speak much of the future, but she alluded to all the incidents of their past life, showing him that nothing which he had done, no words which he had spoken, had been forgotten by her. "Of course it has been my fault," she said, as at last she parted with him in the drawing-room. "When I was younger I did not understand how strong the heart can be. I should have known it, and I pay for my ignorance with the penalty of my whole life." Then he left her, kissing her on both cheeks and on her brow, and went to his bedroom, with the understanding that he would start for London on the following morning before she was up. End of chapter 78. Chapter 79 of Phineas Redux by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Deon Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. At last, at last. As he took his ticket, Phineas sent his message to the Prime Minister, taking that personage literally at his word. The message was no. When writing it in the office, it seemed to him to be uncourteous, but he found it difficult to add any other words that should make it less so. He supplanted it with a letter on his arrival in London, in which he expressed his regret that certain circumstances of his life, which had occurred during the last month or two, made him unfit to undertake the duties of the very pleasant office to which Mr. Gresham had kindly offered to appoint him. That done, he remained in town but one night, and then set his face again towards Matching. When he reached that place, it was already known that he had refused to accept Mr. Gresham's offer, and he was met at once with regrets and condolements. "I am sorry that it must be so," said the Duke, who was sorry, for he liked the man, but who said not a word more upon the subject. "You are still young, and will have further opportunities," said Lord Cantrip, "but I wish that you could have consented to come back to your old chair." "I hope that at any rate we shall not have you against us," said Sir Harry Coldfoot. Among themselves they declared one to another that he had been so completely upset by his imprisonment and subsequent trial as to be unable to undertake the work proposed to him. "It is not a very nice thing, you know, to be accused of murder," said Sir Gregory, "and to pass a month or two under the full conviction that you are going to be hung. He'll come right again some day. I only hope it may not be too late." "So you have decided for freedom," said Madame Goesler to him that evening, the evening of the day on which he had returned. "Yes, indeed." "I have nothing to say against your decision now. No doubt your feelings have prompted you right." "Now that it is done, of course I am full of regrets," said Phineas. "That is simple human nature, I suppose." "Simple enough, and the worst of it is that I cannot quite explain even to myself why I have done it. Every friend I had in the world told me that I was wrong, and yet I could not help myself. The thing was offered to me, not because I was thought to be fit for it, but because I had become wonderful by being brought near to a violent death. I remember once, when I was a child, having a rocking horse given to me because I had fallen from the top of the house to the bottom without breaking my neck. The rocking horse was very well then, but I don't care now to have one bestowed upon me for any such reason. Still, if the rocking horse is in itself a good rocking horse— but it isn't. I don't mean to say a word against your decision. It isn't good. It's one of those toys which look to be so very desirable in this shop window, but which give no satisfaction when they are brought home. I'll tell you what occurred the other day. The circumstances happen to be known to me, although I cannot tell you my authority. My dear old friend Lawrence Fitzgibbon, in the performance of his official duties, had to give an opinion on a matter affecting an expenditure of some 30 or 40,000 pounds of public money. I don't think that Lawrence has generally a very strong bias this way or that on such questions, but in the case in question he took upon himself to be very decided. He wrote, or got someone to write, a report proving that the service of the country imperatively demanded that the money should be spent, and in doing so was strictly within his duty. I am glad to hear that he can be so energetic. The Chancellor of the Exchequer got hold of the matter, and told Fitzgibbon that the thing couldn't be done. That was all right and constitutional, I suppose. Quite right and constitutional, but something had to be said about it in the house, and Lawrence, with all his usual fluency and beautiful Irish brogue, got up and explained that the money would be absolutely thrown away if expended on a purpose so futile as that proposed. I am assured that the great capacity which he has thus shown for official work and official life will cover a multitude of sins. You would hardly have taken Mr. Fitzgibbon as your model statesman. Certainly not, and if the story affected him only, it would hardly be worth telling. But the point of it lies in this, that he disgusted no one by what he did. The Chancellor of the Exchequer thinks him a very convenient man to have about him, and Mr. Gresham feels the comfort of possessing tools so pliable. Do you think that public life, then, is altogether a mistake, Mr. Finn? For a poor man, I think that it is, in this country. A man of fortune may be independent, and because he has the power of independence, those who are higher than he will not expect him to be subservient. A man who takes to parliamentary office for a living may live by it, but he will have but a dog's life of it. If I were you, Mr. Finn, I certainly would not choose a dog's life. He did not say a word to her on that occasion about herself, having made up his mind that a certain period of the following day should be chosen for the purpose, and he had hardly yet arranged in his mind what words he would use on that occasion. It seemed to him that there would be so much to be said that he must settle beforehand some order of saying it. It was not as though he had merely to tell her of his love. There had been talk of love between them before, on which occasion he had been compelled to tell her that he could not accept that which she offered to him. It would be impossible, he knew, not to refer to that former conversation. And then he had to tell her that he, now coming to her as a suitor, and knowing her to be a very rich woman, was himself all but penniless. He was sure, or almost sure, that she was as well aware of this fact as he was himself, but nevertheless it was necessary that he should tell her of it, and if possible to tell her as to force her to believe him when he assured her that he asked her to be his wife, not because she was rich, but because he loved her. It was impossible that all this should be said as they sat side by side in the drawing-room with a crowd of people almost within hearing, and Madame Goesler had just been called upon to play, which she always did directly she was asked. He was invited to make up a rubber, but he could not bring himself to care for cards at the present moment. So he sat apart and listened to the music. If all things went right with him tomorrow, that music, or the musician who made it, would be his own for the rest of his life. Was he justified in expecting that she would give him so much? Of her great regard for him as a friend he had no doubt. She had shown it in various ways, and after a fashion that had made it known to all the world. But so had Lady Laura regarded him when he first told her of his love at Loughlinter. She had been his dearest friend, but she had declined to become his wife, and it had been partly so with Violet Effingham, whose friendship to him had been so sweet as to make him for a while almost think that there was more than friendship. Marie Goesler had certainly once loved him, but so had he once loved Laura Standish. He had been wretched for a while because Lady Laura had refused him. His feelings were now altogether changed, and why should not the feelings of Madame Goesler have undergone a similar change? There was no doubt of her friendship, but then neither was there any doubt of his for Lady Laura, and in spite of her friendship, would not revenge be dear to her, revenge of that nature which a slighted woman must always desire. He had rejected her, and would it not be fair also that he should be rejected? "I suppose you'll be in your own room before lunch to-morrow," he said to her as they separated for the night. It had come to pass from the constancy of her visits to Matching in the old Duke's time that a certain small morning-room had been devoted to her, and this was still supposed to be her property, so that she was not driven to herd with the public or to remain in her bedroom during all the hours of the morning. "Yes," she said, "I shall go out immediately after breakfast, but I shall soon be driven in by the heat, and then I shall be there till lunch. The Duchess always comes about 12:30, to complain generally of the guests." She answered him quite at her ease, making arrangement for privacy if he should desire it, but doing so as though she thought that he wanted to talk to her about his trial, or about politics, or the place he had just refused. Surely she would hardly have answered him after such a fashion had she suspected that he intended to ask her to be his wife. At a little before noon the next morning he knocked at her door and was told to enter. "I didn't go out after all," she said. "I hadn't courage to face the sun. I saw that you were not in the garden. If I could have found you, I would have told you that I should be here all the morning. I might have sent you a message, only I didn't. I have come. I know why you have come. I doubt that. I have come to tell you that I love you. Oh, Phineas, at last, at last." And in a moment she was in his arms. It seemed to him that from that moment all the explanations and all the statements and most of the assurances were made by her and not by him. After this first embrace he found himself seated beside her, holding her hand. "I do not know that I am right," said he. "Why not right?" "Because you are rich and I have nothing." "If you ever remind me of that again I will strike you," she said, raising up her little fist and bringing it down with gentle pressure on his shoulder. "Between you and me there must be nothing more about that. It must be an even partnership. There must be ever so much about money, and you'll have to go into dreadful details and make journeys to Vienna to see that the houses don't tumble down, but there must be no question between you and me of whence it came. You will not think that I have come to you for that. Have you ever known me to have a low opinion of myself? Is it probable that I shall account myself to be personally so mean and of so little value as to imagine that you cannot love me? I know you love me. But, Phineas, I have not been sure till very lately that you would ever tell me so. As for me, oh, heavens, when I think of it! Tell me that you love me now." "I think I have said so plainly enough. I have never ceased to love you since I first knew you well enough for love, and I'll tell you more, though perhaps I shall say what you will think condemns me. You are the only man I ever loved. My husband was very good to me, and I was, I think, good to him, but he was many years my senior, and I cannot say I loved him as I do you." Then she turned to him and put her head on his shoulder. "And I loved the old Duke, too, after a fashion, but it was a different thing from this. I will tell you something about him some day that I have never yet told to a human being." "Tell me now." "No, not till I am your wife. You must trust me. But I will tell you," she said, "lest you should be miserable. He asked me to be his wife." "The old Duke?" "Yes, indeed, and I refused to be a duchess. Lady Glencora knew it all, and just at the time I was breaking my heart, like a fool, for you. Yes, for you. But I got over it, and am not broken-hearted a bit. Oh, Phineas, I am so happy now." Exactly at the time she had mentioned on the previous evening, at 12:30, the door was opened, and the Duchess entered the room. "Oh dear," she exclaimed, "perhaps I am in the way. Perhaps I am interrupting secrets." "No, Duchess." "Shall I retire? I will at once, if there be anything confidential going on." "It has gone on already, and been completed," said Madame Goesler, rising from her seat. "It is only a trifle. Mr. Finn has asked me to be his wife." "Well, I couldn't refuse Mr. Finn a little thing like that." "I should think not, after going all the way to Prague to find a latch-key. I congratulate you, Mr. Finn, with all my heart." "Thanks, Duchess. And when is it to be?" "We have not thought about that yet, Mr. Finn, have we?" said Madame Goesler. "Adelaide Palliser is going to be married from here some time in the autumn," said the Duchess, "and you two had better take advantage of the occasion." This plan, however, was considered as being too rapid and rash. Marriage is a very serious affair, and many things would require arrangement. A lady with the wealth which belonged to Madame Goesler cannot bestow herself off-hand, as may a curate's daughter, let her be ever so willing to give her money as well as herself. It was impossible that a day should be fixed quite at once, but the Duchess was allowed to understand that the affair might be mentioned. Before dinner on that very day every one of the guests at Matching Priory knew that the man who had refused to be made Under-Secretary of State had been accepted by that possessor of fabulous wealth, who was well known to the world as Madame Goesler of Park Lane. "I am very glad that you did not take office under Mr. Gresham," she said to him when they first met each other again in London. "Of course, when I was advising you, I could not be sure that this would happen. Now you can bide your time, and if the opportunity offers, you can go to work under better auspices." End of chapter 79. Chapter 80 of Phineas Redux by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Deon Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Conclusion. There remains to us the very easy task of collecting together the ends of the thread of our narrative, and tying them into a simple knot, so that there may be no unravelling. Of Mr. Emilius it has been already said that his good fortune clung to him so far that it was found impossible to connect him with the tragedy of Bolton Row. But he was made to vanish for a certain number of years from the world, and dear little Lizzie Eustace was left a free woman. When last we heard of her she was at Naples, and there was then a rumour that she was about to join her fate to that of Lord George de Bruce Carruthers, with whom pecuniary matters had lately not been going comfortably. Let us hope that the match, should it be a match, may lead to the happiness and respectability of both of them. As all the world knows, Lord and Lady Chiltern still live at Harrington Hall, and he has been considered to do very well with the Brake country. He still grumbles about Trumpton Wood, and says that it will take a lifetime to repair the injuries done by Mr. Fothergill. But then who ever knew a master of hounds who wasn't ill-treated by the owners of coverts? Of Mr. Tom Spooner it can only be said that he is still a bachelor, living with his cousin Ned, and that none of the neighbours expect to see a lady at Spoon Hall. In one winter, after the period of his misfortune, he became slack about his hunting, and there were rumours that he was carrying out that terrible threat of his as to the crusade which he would go to find a cure for his love. But his cousin took him in hand somewhat sharply, made him travel abroad during the summer, and brought him out the next season as fresh as paint, as the members of the Brake Hunt declared. It was known to every sportsman in the country that poor Mr. Spooner had been in love, but the affair was allowed to be a mystery, and no one ever spoke to Spooner himself upon the subject. It is probable that he now reaps no slight amount of gratification from his memory of the romance. The marriage between Gerard Maule and Adelaide Palliser was celebrated with great glory at Matching, and was mentioned in all the leading papers as an alliance in high life. When it became known to Mr. Maule, senior, that this would be so, and that the lady would have a very comfortable fortune from the old Duke, he reconciled himself to the marriage altogether, and at once gave way in the matter of Maule Abbey. Nothing, he thought, would be more suitable than that the young people should live at the old family place. So Maule Abbey was fitted up, and Mr. and Mrs. Maule have taken up their residence there. Under the influence of his wife, he has promised to attend to his farming, and proposes to do no more than go out and see the hounds when they come into his neighbourhood. Let us hope that he may prosper. Should the farming come to a good end, more will probably have been due to his wife's enterprise than to his own. The energetic father is, as all the world knows, now in pursuit of a widow with 3,000 a year, who has lately come out in Cavendish Square. Of poor Lord Fawn no good account can be given. To his thinking, official life had none of those drawbacks with which the fantastic feelings of Phineas Finn had invested it. He could have been happy forever at the India Board or at the Colonial Office, but his life was made a burden to him by the affair of the Bonteen murder. He was charged with having nearly led to the fatal catastrophe of Phineas Finn's condemnation by his erroneous evidence, and he could not bear the accusation. Then came the further affair of Mr. Emilius, and his mind gave way, and he disappeared. Let us hope that he may return some day with renewed health, and again be of service to his country. Poetical justice reached Mr. Quintus Slide of the People's Banner. The acquittal and following glories of Phineas Finn were gall and wormwood to him, and he continued his attack upon the member for Tankerville even after it was known that he had refused office, and was about to be married to Madame Goesler. In these attacks he made allusions to Lady Laura, which brought Lord Chiltern down upon him, and there was an action for libel. The paper had to pay damages and costs, and the proprietors resolved that Mr. Quintus Slide was too energetic for their purposes. He is now earning his bread in some humble capacity on the staff of the Ballot Box, which is supposed to be the most democratic daily newspaper published in London. Mr. Slide has, however, expressed his intention of seeking his fortune in New York. Lawrence Fitzgibbon certainly did himself a good turn by his obliging deference to the opinion of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He has been in office ever since. It must be acknowledged of all our leading statesmen that gratitude for such services is their characteristic. It is said that he spends much of his eloquence in endeavouring to make his wife believe that the air of County Mayo is the sweetest in the world. Hitherto, since his marriage, this eloquence has been thrown away, for she has been his companion through the session in London. It is rumoured that Barrington Erle is to be made Secretary for Ireland, but his friends doubt whether the office will suit him. The marriage between Marie Goesler and our hero did not take place till October, and then they went abroad for the greater part of the winter, Phineas having received leave of absence officially from the Speaker and unofficially from his constituents. After all that he had gone through, it was acknowledged that so much ease should be permitted to him. They went first to Vienna and then back into Italy, and were unheard of by their English friends for nearly 6 months. In April they reappeared in London, and the house in Park Lane was opened with great éclat. Of Phineas every one says that of all living men he has been the most fortunate. The present writer will not think so, unless he shall soon turn his head to some useful task. Those who know him best say that he will of course go into office before long. Of poor Lady Laura hardly a word need be said. She lives at Salisbury the life of a recluse, and the old earl her father is still alive. The Duke, as all the world knows, is on the very eve of success with the decimal coinage, but his hair is becoming grey, and his back is becoming bent, and men say that he will never live as long as his uncle. But then he will have done a great thing, and his uncle did only little things. Of the Duchess no word need be said. Nothing will ever change the Duchess. End of chapter 80. End of Phineas Redux by Anthony Trollope.